Welcome to the most important week of the year for the podcast industry. Welcome to Podcast Movement 2025.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Jon Savage. This is Ike
Orizu.
I'm from the Africa Podcast Network. We're the largest podcasting network in Africa. We also run one of the largest empowerment hubs in Africa, supporting podcasters, and are also now building ad tech in the podcasting and creator economy.
All right. I'm Ike Orizu, founder and CEO of Jamit. We're building a decentralized podcast hosting platform that has socialify, gamify to help people engage more with podcasts, audio stories, and audio series as well. Built out of Africa as well.
Cool. So I think the important part is we just want to give some context. Africa, the stuff that is happening, and there's not just us. There's quite a few other tech businesses that we were hoping to come now, but there's a very different perspective of this podcasting space. A lot of the cool tech, a lot of the infrastructure that you're used to out here doesn't exist in Africa. And so you're forced to think out of the box. It's why a lot of the most famous entrepreneurs are often from Africa, because you really are building something sort of from a fresh slate. And why the perspective that we're going to be talking about is quite interesting, particularly hanging around here, is because, one of the things we were saying earlier is that even a conference like this is sort of making the assumption that this is an established market, but it really should be like a punk rock concert, because this is still an emerging market. It's not established. And in the tech spaces, what we're seeing, because the perspective is really different, is that a lot of the innovation is happening by fixing and adapting legacy technology. Now, that legacy technology is not, it doesn't exist where you are in Africa. So a lot of it is building from scratch. And when you're doing that, you have a very different perspective on what you're building. Now, why we put in the title this idea that Africa is the new Silicon Valley, because as podcasting is facing certain challenges, and even in the US market, there's quite a lot of doom and gloom about the state of the industry. In Africa, it's really exciting, it's really fledgling, and there are innovations and building technology that, as the rest of the world is trying to find solutions for, they're coming out of Africa. And a great example is like the stuff you're doing with Jamit, which I'm really excited to talk to you about. So I think the first question is, maybe just for context, what do you think are the challenges we face in Africa that is leading to the innovation that we're building?
Yeah, quick story here. We started as a podcast network years ago during the COVID. And in Africa, when you start a podcast, you literally only have the hosting services that are also from the West. And we found ourselves having to pay for like 20 podcasts, and it was like, then $30, $29.99 normally to host one podcast. And the idea of us having to do that for 20 podcasts was already getting to us spending pretty much almost $600, $700. Now, that is not a problem for anyone who is in the US. But the problem...
When you've got a shitty currency.
Exactly. And what happened at that point was that $30 is pretty much what someone makes as their whole salary in a month. In Africa. And so you're thinking, how do you tell this podcast that, hey, you're going to give me a whole salary to pay for hosting just your podcast? And how will they eat? How will they pay their rent? How will they buy food or do other things? And it was the hardest thing to convince them to do that. And so we realized quickly that the pricing over here was not what we could work with, and had to start figuring out how do we go ahead and fix that as soon as possible. The other part was that even though we were doing that, they were not monetizing. So even with the 20 podcasts, we could even get monetized because we don't have Patreon, we don't have PayPal, we don't have Stripe, we don't have all these guys that give us the payment rails to be able to make money for even the podcasters. So we had to rely on advertisers who are heavily legacy focused, and they don't care about podcasts. They were just focused more on legacy radio. And so that was the challenges that we started seeing forefront, and decided that, hey, we're gonna work on it. But John, what were yours?
Yeah, so I think if I think back, the the problems that have led to the solutions are so interesting, because you don't realize it's so hard to fathom when you're walking around Texas, Dallas, Texas, how much infrastructure you're starting with. Whereas back at home, there's literally no. It's like getting from 0 to 1 is a really big challenge. So we started our business before we were looking at the technology and the monetization. Is how do we start supporting the ecosystem and building an affordable ecosystem for podcasters to start creating podcasts. And that we built a studio called AMPD Studios. And that really built in South Africa the whole commercial component of this, because podcasters were able from 0 to actually being monetizable to be able to break through into that space. And then we started creating, to your point, how do we now start putting this into the monetization lane? And it was that where we found, again, because none of the tools, even like YouTube's more advanced monetization tools, they're not live yet, and Spotify's as well. So what you've got is a lot of these guys kind of building stuff from scratch. And even though maybe those platforms aren't going to compete, they really are creating a new ecosystem that solves problems that you guys are having now.
And what I'm gonna add to that, for us, how we started solving was that we had to build immediately. And once we realized, wait a minute, we have a network, we have podcasts. First of all, everyone here, raise your hands, who knows Lion King here? You know Black Panther, right? You know Avatar. Most of all these stories have been inspired by African lores. Majority of the billion-dollar, titles you see, think about it, are all inspired. Even if you look at Marvel's characters, half of them are all inspired by African mythology gods. And so
Drake's last 2 albums were written by people in Africa.
In Africa, exactly. And so you just have to know that there is so much storytelling that comes out from Africa alone. Then we look into the Asian market, and to me, it's like so much untold stories that are yet to even come out on podcasts or through immersive audio, etc. And so this was one thing that really drove us to say we needed to build a platform that could support even the ones who can afford to do it, but they have the stories. And so building quickly, we had to use blockchain technology and build the Web3. And so what would cost us like $30 a month to host podcasts and deal with, some podcast hosting companies at that time. We were using Triton, Spreaker at that point, just to call out. But we had to figure out how to fix that. And with blockchain technology, we brought hosting a podcast to 25 cents for us. And so I could tell anyone in Africa, hey, give me 25 cents. I'm going to put your podcast on chain and have you hosted for life. And they're looking like, I'm not going to have to pay anything again. No, you don't have to. The only thing you pay a little, maybe 1 cent for us at each episode. And so that became our breakthrough technology that we were able to figure out that, wait a minute, we could actually solve this problem for them. And we started building out. Now, we looked into the monetization layer and then figured out that, wait a minute, we could also allow them accept cryptocurrencies. We can allow them accept USDC and, allow them accept Ethereum and other types of cryptocurrency. And the more we kept looking at the layers and the opportunity of what the blockchain technology brought to us, we were able to figure out that, wait a minute, we just built something that has just changed how podcasting is going to be for the next few years. And for us, we started figuring out, let's start building as quick as possible. Let's try and make this thing happen ASAP. And so that solution became one of those things that made us realize that this challenge can be solved so easily using technology that exists out there, and then work with the, like the podcast standards project or, podcast 2.0 and introduce this technology as well to them. And so that was how we solved for it and, moved into, I'll talk about monetization, but you go first.
Cool. Well, mine is monetization. It's so interesting. Again, we're aliens, man. We're alien invaders, and the approach is so like from our perspective, your approach is all backwards, and when you listen to us, it must be the opposite. But in Africa, like monetization is key. You can't sit and build a business around distribution because it's just you're not going to be able to build a business out of that. And because there's sort of a hesitancy around subscriptions anyway, which is why YouTube's so big, that isn't a model, and that is what has driven so much of the monetization part. We had to really aggressively, looking at the problems, figure out now, when you are from like the townships around Africa, like there's kind of now three things. You either want to be a football player, like a hip hop artist or an amapiano artist, or a podcaster or a content creator, right? And they're relying on these things now to get them out of the ghetto, the sort of American words. So this monetization aspect is totally critical. And so with a lot of the whole ecosystem from AMPed to the Africa Podcast Network and now Podium Ad Connect was to get to monetization as soon as possible. So we had to leapfrog so much of the what? Yeah. The existing models, because they weren't solving that problem. So in our network, our podcasters are earning really good revenue. Some of them build their own studios. They've started their own networks underneath our network because revenue is so critical to the existence to this happening. So we couldn't be relaxed about it. And again, it's these kind of things that, remember I said like earlier, it's kind of like punk rock. We're still in punk rock phase and trying to solve those pain points on the problem. So let's talk about we've done the solution. Let's talk about how we're looking at monetization, or what are the ways we've managed to drive revenue. Because I don't know if you're allowed to talk about your one big client and how you got that client.
We will announce that later, but
okay, never mind.
But I'll talk about other things. We do have a lot of announcements coming up with funny enough, with Western companies from the US that found out about technology and are using them, and when we signed, then obviously we get to that point. But we decided that we were going to build also the distribution layer, because we got to a point where, yes, we had already solved the hosting part, and other podcasters wanted to use ours because it was cheaper, but they still had to rely on the top three to distribute their podcast, meaning, the Apple Podcast, the Spotify, and Castboxes and Overcast. And we had to realize that, wait a minute, it's so hard to get them featured as well. You go on to, I was working in Silicon Valley at that time. I was in San Francisco, and I remember going on Apple Podcasts. And again, this is not a call out to them. They have the right to do whatever they want with their algorithms. But I got to a point where I would look at it and I could not discover podcasts that related to me, or related to my locale, or things that I knew about, or even just my interest. I could go on YouTube, and YouTube knows everything about me and recommends the right thing to me. And so we don't have platforms that do that with the podcast part yet. And so you have just the same regular, top 5 that they will always push to you and, tell you to go listen to. And I decided that I'm going to build as something that was going to allow people to distribute, but also when their audience comes on our platform, they get to find out more things that relate to them, and we're able to push that to them. And so we started using machine learning to learn more things and get points and listening points and what people were listening to, and get all the things we could do to train our data, and now decided to build our own recommendation engine. And so when we realized, wait a minute, we could also do the distribution layer, we went all full in. And so we ended up having the infrastructure to host, but also the infrastructure to distribute. As we did that, it was easier for us to now recommend and show people what they should listen to. But the other part was we were able to add the payment rails easily. And so we introduced what we call Jamit coins. And Jamit coins is just the equivalent to what TikTok coins are. And TikTok coins are, you go on live or TikTok live, you're able to use TikTok coins and give to people and buy, digital gifts and send to people. And we just did the same thing. We just created Jamit coins, partnered with Coinbase, and Coinbase allowed us to convert our cryptocurrencies to Jamit coins. And we partnered with Stripe, and Stripe allowed us to convert fiat to, Jamit coins. And Jamit coins are given to the creators, and creators are able to convert it to whatever cryptocurrency they want, or USDC. Now, USDC and cryptocurrency is very popular in Africa. So when I'm talking about it, I know it's not that popular. I mean, it's popular here, but it's not being used. Africa is the #1 continent that uses cryptocurrency. Then Asia before the Americas. And so we are heavily focused on how do we everyone's trying to figure out how to make money and make it quick. And so we are trying to move our poverty line from 80% to maybe 10%. And for us, that's what our goal is, to figure out that, look, we need to make someone come out of the trenches and come out from the hood and, be able to say, because of my podcast, I'm able to make enough money to take care of my life. We do it as a hobby here. People tell stories to make a living.
I'm so glad you said that.
Go ahead.
And sorry to interrupt. Why podcasting is so exciting in Africa is because they're not hobbyists, right? This is the lifeblood. Yeah. This is what they live and breathe because they're trying to change their and that is what is driving so much of the trend setting. Sorry, I love that you said that.
No, you're right, because you ask people now from college, they've been so much influenced by everything they've seen online that everyone, back then you say, what do you want to become? And everyone tells you, I want to become a lawyer, I want to be an astronaut, etc. Even with data right now, everyone is saying that 50% of youths and Gen Zers want to become content creators. So imagine that influence getting to African youth. Now everybody,
the largest youth market on the planet.
The largest youth market on the planet. You now have more people, that's more than 50%, thinking that I need to be a creator to make enough money to be...
I want to jump on this. So, because I'm also referring to this WhatsApp group. So we watched this amazing film last night, Age of Audio, which was absolutely phenomenal, about the age of podcasting. But the one thing where, and the story was amazing, I really recommend you see it. I just can't tell you, that is a film worth watching if you love podcasting. But then I also looking at the discussions. One of the things it was highlighting, which is the part I didn't relate to, was the podcaster who he's won all his awards. He's out there, but he's still like working at a restaurant for his day job, and podcasting will never make you money. That is not happening in Africa. Our podcasters are rock stars. They are selling out places. We're making real money. They're buying houses. They are driving smart cars. And this is where I think there's a lot of it's partly why we're on this stage trying to create more collaboration, because there's a whole world there that you're able to tap into that is invisible. From our side, for example, one of the trends that happened in Africa kind of first, although we don't quite agree entirely, is that YouTube is so central to Africa. And Spotify came really late. So podcasters kind of started in YouTube and then migrated into the digital. So all of the technology we're running in monetization is already integrated into both of those things. And we've been at these conferences for years, saying video or video, and there's been a lot of resistance to it. But it's kind of here, and it's kind of coming, and it's part of the rock star frills of what's happening in podcasting. But in terms of just the innovations in monetization, for us, the biggest thing to really drive was not we're trying to make as much money as possible to change the lives of these podcasters. So there was a lot of pressure on us, first as a network, which drove the technology, is how do we do this at scale really, really fast? And programmatic was not doing it. So programmatic advertising is and YouTube AdSense is like basically paying for the lights and your meals. So how do you actually now leverage that up? And so the entire ecosystem that we've been working out with Podiumac and the amazing stuff you're doing in Web3 is really maximizing revenue in this space using technology by allowing agencies at scale to buy into podcasts. So a lot of the technology is that we're working on is how do you be an independent podcaster but behave like a network? How can brands tap into you as a single podcaster but also be able to tap into 1,000 other podcasters? So you don't have to be the scale, but you can, your market can be the scale, and that's really been working. So I don't know if you want to...
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, majority of you said something in terms of YouTube, and the reason why we don't agree is he's heavily video focused, I'm heavily audio focused, and there's nothing wrong. I believe that there's synergy between those two parts.
Fight.
No, there is no fighting. I felt like the opportunity for... YouTube caught on the opportunity quicker than everyone else in Africa, and they went all in and convinced everyone that this was the future of content creating. There's nothing wrong with that. But radio is the most listened to medium in Africa. And if radio is the most listened to medium in Africa,
Agreed.
then people want to listen more, right? And then it's cheaper also for someone to wake up in the morning, or a 17-year-old kid to wake up and say, I got a story to tell, and record it on audio with their phone. Now, that phone might be a 3G phone, a cheaper phone, but they can record something and push that in and get to start making and say, hey, I've done this, support me. 100 people support me with $1, well, not $1, maybe 50 cents with our economies, and that will work. Versus someone who has to wake up in the morning and go figure out how am I going to get that Sony camera or that iPhone or that, Samsung to get to that level. And that's already, an 18-year-old kid can't do that on the regular. It's someone who's working already in the corporate life in their 20s, if possible, probably 30s, to be able to afford to say, I'm going to have Lightning, I'm going to have all this. And so we wanted to make sure that we were able to capture that market of the oral tradition and the oral storytellers and the people that just want to talk. I have had more people tell me, like, I don't like video. I don't want anyone to see my face. I want to just speak my mind. And that is what we want to make sure we capture in that market as well. There are 4 billion, 6 billion people. We have the opportunity to get even 1% of that, and that is enough to even just destroy the whole market in the West. And so we believe that the audio market, the audio storytellers are still there, and the infrastructure building for them is the amazing thing, like turning their voices to NFTs and making their voices collectibles, and people are able to collect it and make money from that. And sometimes they release special editions, and they say, hey, this episode is only going to be for guys in my club. If you have my NFT pass, you will have access to that. Or if you've given me a boost, which is the Jamit coins, if you boosted me like 10 times, you have access to listen to this podcast. Those are reels that they can now do, and they don't have to rely on AdSense or YouTube's AdSense to be able to make money. We've never used YouTube as a monetization reel, but we know that majority of the podcasters, which the big ones, require video. But we have so much new entrants and so many new guys that we're trying to educate that, wait a minute, you just told this story on stage in school. You're in school and you just told this story and everyone loves it. Bring this story and let's bring it and digitize it and take it to a global audience. And so this is what I believe that is such a blue ocean for us to tap into that no one else has, or anyone else within the ecosystem with all the companies I've seen being able to do at the moment.
And the market is completely wide open. No one is looking at Africa. It's a free-for-all. It's a land grab of massive proportions.
That's why we're grabbing us.
And that's why. And then just one other thing, back on that monetization, and this is also sort of, I didn't realize, it's kind of a cultural thing, maybe. The revenue thing. So if you can go back to what we're talking about, the challenges, that making revenue really fast is a critical component of survival. It's not a nice to have, right? And so one of the things that has really become strong, and it's not liked everywhere. Like I realized in the UK, there's so much resistance from what I'm about to say, but like the ecosystem looks like subscriptions don't really work in Africa. And they still work everywhere, but they don't really scale that well everywhere, the terms of subs. So that really advertising, unfortunately, fortunately, is where, if you look at the advertising industry globally, it has a huge problem. It has a problem of advertising agencies are collapsing. Facebook, YouTube, the mass marketing budgets are going to getting reach, but podcasting has people's attention. This is the gold standard. And so our whole ecosystem is built into the fact that if you want to make money from your podcast, the strongest ecosystem is really solving the advertiser's problem and utilizing podcasters as the answer to that solution. And I feel like the entire creator economy is actually kind of moving into that space. As Hollywood is struggling with its industry, it's kind of moving into the podcasting environment. And there's a nice symbiosis between advertising revenue, and that doesn't mean it has to be a host-read live read or a programmatic ad insert. The real innovation is happening in how do we bring ads safely into the space that enhance, and there's a mutual kind of respect there. And that's a really interesting piece of the business, and all of our tech is based on scaling the unscalable. So programmatic is easy. How do you build something that scales the collaboration between how brands are working with podcasters individually at scale? And that's really interesting because I think like this is a lot of podcasters are struggling with ads. It's like a swear word, but like I said, because of the pain point, this wasn't something we didn't have time to mess about and try and like. It's not an emotional thing, and that's why I think back to the beginning. There's a lot of leapfrogging happening where we're bypassing all of this middle ecosystem stuff or the assumptions because the pain points are so real and they're so on your doorstep. We're having to solve them quicker.
I know we have a few more seconds and we're going to QA, but I'm going to give you guys 3 things that's happening in Africa and pretty much in emerging markets. The first one was that we got to a point where laptops and computers were so expensive. They were in the West. Africans could not afford it, right? Tablets came out, we were a little bit able to afford it, but the phones became smarter. And Africans saw that was the cheapest mode to be able to use a phone and do exactly what a laptop could do. And we leapfrogged from using desktops. I don't even think I never used a desktop in my life.
We just bypassed computers, went straight to phone.
We literally just bypassed everything and went straight to the phone. And that's how we became the #1 mobile market globally. The same thing happened with radio. Obviously, Hollywood was the biggest thing in the 1800s or 1980s and all that. And everyone was creating movies, etc. We did not have movies. We did not have we didn't have that kind of industry, but we wrote books. We wrote so many books. At the same time, the radio industry was the cheapest mode, and we jumped straight to radio and focused on radio heavily and went through that. The third part is in our school systems right now, majority of the people that come in, back then they were like, oh, you have to be a doctor, you have to do this. Because of the culture and how we have so many oral traditional storytellers from our parents, our grandparents, they will talk to their children about what they want to do. And so the easiest thing and the most thing that a current youth right now knows how to do is just how do I have fun and tell the story. And so you now saw majority, before even TikTok happened, majority of them were studying mass communication, radio, or studying being a journalist and studying how to become a creator even before now. And so when you see, and if you look at your top 100 creators, content creators, you will realize that if you look globally, you will see more Africans and Asians than Americans in them. And that's because of how much we were taught how to enjoy life and tell stories and have fun with stories. So just want to let you know that we have leapfrogged, also with the podcasting industry. And we are welcoming every single person to come learn from Africa, but also join with Africa in moving things forward in a way that is sustainable for even the global audience out there and also the global creators out there at the end. So
I want to add one to your list, and it's back to my favorite topic of video, right? There's a massive thing happening in Nigeria that's been going on the last year that was inspired by YouTube, who actually actively, and for me, even though it's just anecdotal, it really is showing upcoming trends that are happening globally anyway. So there's a new movie industry. Nigeria has moved to one of the fastest YouTube consumption in the world really quickly in the last year because YouTube sat with them and said, okay, why don't you start looking at the Nigerians are famous for making movies for nothing, man. And so they were starting a movie industry using YouTube, small budget films that the AdSense revenue was doubling and tripling on the size of those films. And it's a really interesting to look at because, again, it has nothing to do with video, audio. To me, I'm just platform agnostic. I want to be where people are making content and where people are consuming content. And YouTube's just part of that environment, love it or hate it. But it's showing really interesting ways that creators are thinking about creating revenue. And as the mainstream video or TV or let's say content and entertainment space are struggling with the new economy, these podcasting solutions are actually solving those things for everybody. Anyway, that's us. We got 10 seconds. So anyone got a 2-second question? Yay.
This is great. Really eye-opening. Thank you. I'm wondering if we want to check out some creators in Africa, where should we start? Who should we be checking out that's like a good entry point into, and just to be able to get a vision for what's happening there?
Jamit the app. That's a good plug. Jamit the app.
Or the Africa Podcast Network. Oh, you forced me into that corner.
The only one. That's it. There you go.
Look, we've got a Joe Rogan in Africa called Mac G. I mean, love him or hate him, he's extremely divisive. There is a really amazing Pan-African network called Glitch Africa who are doing really, really cool stuff. There's a South African podcaster who's literally taking over the world at the moment that Mr. Beast is poaching from us. His name is Joshua Rubin. And he's really interesting. I know we're out of time. He's really interesting because I don't think he's ever heard a podcast before. He's kind of reinvented the entire format. He's like a little bit, sort of maybe on this, can you say that? He's not really on this planet. And what he's doing is so innovative in his storytelling that it's completely game-changing. There's nothing else like it in the market. And it's blowing up. And one interesting thing is that he came to America. He came to move here. And he moved back after 3 months. And in his words, all your stories are told already. He came back telling African stories, and he's a global sensation. His name is Joshua Rubin, the Wide Awake Podcast. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Podcast Movement.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.